Today we'll be covering a number of stuff. So in the first section, we'll be looking at linguicism and the history and the legacy. We'll be looking at naming practices from all over the world and the Say It Right campaign that we started at DMU last year. And then in part 2, we're going to try and get involved with our mics muted, looking at transliteration, accents, stresses, and practicing some of these, and then practical steps to get people's names correctly. And then in part 3, we're going to look at how, like, the ways it impacts students in higher education.
And just as a quick introduction, so my name is Hina and this is my colleague Kauzara, and we both work at the Students' Union. So we've been working on this campaign called Say It Right, and we're really excited to present it as a workshop. So I really hope you enjoy. So to start off, so we have so many students from different cultures with such beautiful names that we might not have heard of before. And it's really important that we make the effort to learn people's names, because names hold so much meaning, history and identity within them. So we should use this opportunity at DMU to find out what they mean and how to say them properly. So as I mentioned, we're running a campaign called Say It Right, which aims to normalise the pronunciation of non-English sounding names. We wanted to create a campus that's accepting of people's backgrounds and of people's names. The interconnectedness of our world now means that we're more likely to meet people with names or letters that we're perhaps not familiar with. But it's important that we take the time to learn how to say people's names correctly, whether it be our colleagues, our students, our neighbours, or people that we've just met. So we'd like to also mention is that we know that there are students and staff that may have stammers, may struggle to say certain letters or words, or perhaps are dyslexic and therefore they can't, sometimes will not say the name correctly when they read it. We're not looking to pick out those individuals, rather we're working on trying to create awareness on making the effort when you can say it correctly. So we've created a video that we'd love for you to have a look at, so we'll just post it in the chat so you can have a look if you want to another time. And if you're interested in getting involved, or if you have a non-English sounding name, then if you send us a short video of your 30 seconds max to dsucomms@dmu.ac.uk, we'd love to put them all together and create a video for you.
So we're just going to start off. We want to make this interactive. So as an icebreaker, we're going to introduce ourselves with the meaning of our name or why you were named that. You can put that in the chat. So I'll go first. My name is Kauzara Okikiola. So essentially Kauzara means river in paradise or abundance of good. And then my middle name means like prestige or wealth. So my name is River in Paradise, Prestige and Wealth. You know?
And so my name is Hina Kamar. So Hina is, you might have heard of it, is henna you get on mendi or that you get on your hand. So it derives from a plant, and Kamar means moon. So that comes from the Urdu words. So if you wouldn't mind if you put your hand up, or if you could message in the chat box just what your name means, and it'll be really interesting for us to hear. If you don't know what your name means, even just a short telling us how your parents chose it, that'd be really interesting as well. So, let's see. If anybody wants to go, that would be great. Oh, we've got one in the chat box. I'll read it out. So. So we have Ankarad, I want to say Ankarad.
I was just about to say Hina, is it, or do you want me to pronounce it? But you're correct, it is Anharad. So I'm known as Lisa in work. I have been since I went to university as an undergraduate. I apologise for the trumpet noise in the background. But because Anharad is really difficult to pronounce in English, even though it's a Welsh name. So I look English, I sound English, but actually being from one of the regions, it was easier to actually use my middle name than it was to try and teach everybody how to pronounce my first name.
Oh, thank you, Ankara. So it's sorry, did you say that it was Welsh?
It is, yes.
Welsh. Wonderful, beautiful. Thank you so much. So we've got a few more there. So we've got Beverly, and it means from the Beaver Meadows. Next up we have Zara. It's a biblical name from the Hebrew Bible, wife of Abraham, and sometimes also means princess. Oh, that's lovely. Sarah means princess or woman of high rank. And Ursula says, I've got German and English parents who picked a name that's pronounceable in German or in English. My middle name is after the series Elizabeth R with Glenda Jackson that was on TV. So when my mum was carrying me, she was worried about girl not being strong. So that's Ursula. Oh, that's lovely. I think somebody's got their hand up. Let me just check who that is. Angela.
Yes, sorry, the chat won't load for me, unfortunately, but my first name, Angela, means angel. I'm not sure if I am angelic, but that's what it means. My surname, O'Sullivan, is an Irish name, but it actually means one-eyed, and it relates to the Spanish Armada who got shipwrecked in Ireland, and apparently, I think, like pirates or something, they were supposed to be one-eyed.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Angela. That's really interesting just to hear everybody's different names and different meanings. I noticed as well, like, so something like Angela, I think there's also different derivatives in different cultures of the same names as well. So that's really great to hear. Thank you, everyone.
So we're just going to get right into it. So for anyone who doesn't know what linguistic discrimination is, it's the unfair treatment which is based on the use of language and characteristics of speech, including those people that might have a first language and accent. Maybe the size of their vocabulary is very varied, or they use complex words and modality and syntax. And also name discrimination is discrimination based on someone's name, and this sits under linguistic discrimination.
So before we move on, it's important to understand why it is important that we get this right. So colonisation gave rise to a language hierarchy, which the language of the coloniser was inscribed as the most prestigious language. So naming practices by European colonisers served to inject a sense of shame and a legacy of inferiority. Of the world's estimated 7,500 languages, over half of them will be extinct by the year 2050 owing to imperialism. And so colonisers, European colonisers defiled African names to try and erase African identity. And this also happened at different places in the world as well. Thus, to obliterate African collective memories and identity, colonisers would assign new names or even leave people nameless as a way to subjugating them to perpetual servitude. So to understand this history is to know why we shouldn't be lazy, or when we hear names that we're perhaps not familiar with. We see how this impacts us today in the statistics on people with non-English sounding names have when they enter employment. Kauzara is just going to show us a few of those statistics.
Although we might think that, like, you know, like saying someone's name, like, you know, it's just a simple error and stuff. In 2018, BBC did a survey to look at how naming practice or naming discrimination can still have such a big impact in the world we live in. And so they, in comparison to people with English sounding names, other ethnic groups are sending in 80% more job applications. And this is the same with when UCAS a couple of years ago, they felt that their names, or Black students with names that were non-English sounding as well, their UCAS application was screened twice. So, but in this case, so 70% of people from Pakistani heritage or Pakistani names are having to send in 70% more job applications. South Asian and Nigerian, 80% more. And then Middle Eastern and North African having to send in 90% more applications. I'm just going to move swiftly on to look at naming cultures and naming practices in order to appreciate how different ways people name in different cultures. So for many people from different places, names are given for a reason. So names can be associated with the day they were born, the weather, glorification of God, or other types of beliefs. In some cultures like mine, I'm Yoruba, so I'm from Nigeria. We don't give a child a name with a negative meaning because we believe that names have an influence on one's social attitude and behavior. And then looking at naming practice from all around the world. So of course, in England, we have personal name and we have last name, but not all cultures have that. So for some people that might migrate to England, or students, it might be difficult for them to understand, for example, the word surname, or because their culture just doesn't have that. So for example, in the Somali culture, the child would have a personal name, and then the father's personal name, and then the grandfather's personal name. And then in some cultures, they just won't have, like I said, last names. And then there will be some cultures that have patronymic names, similar to Johnson or MacDonald, son of Johnson or son of Donald. And it still exists today, particularly in Eastern Europe or in the Western Balkans. People have so for example, in Bulgaria, they'll have the Petrov, the of at the end is patronymic. Some will have, like I said, the grandfather's personal name. If I'm correct, in Spanish culture and Portuguese culture, a child might have their personal name and then their mother's paternal family name and then their father's paternal family name. Honorifics are also quite famous and quite popular in some cultures. So for example, if a person is known as a doctor, that doctor might be attached to their name. So they might be calling them Dr. For example, throughout, and most people know them as that. But honorifics can also be, like, for example, where I'm from, we have a way of talking to people that are our age, and we have a way of talking to people that are older than us, or people with like higher status, for example, like maybe a doctor or a teacher or someone respectable. And then some people will have religious names as well, like myself. My first name is actually my religious name. And then some people might have clan names attached as well. So they'll have their first name. And then if they're from like a specific clan, it might be attached to their first name or their last name. So if they go somewhere else, someone knows that's where they're specifically from. And that's it from me.
So that's us just finished up with part one there. So we hope that that kind of short, quick explanations are helpful to understand some of the reasons why it is important that we get people's names correct. So next we're going to move on to what this means practically. So why is it so hard? So sometimes you get names that aren't pronounced how you see it spelled, or there's different ways that you have seen it spelled. So this can be cultural. Sometimes we get different variations of similar names. Looking at this graphic, you can see that there's different ways of spelling and saying these names up here. When you try and write a name from one language to another, sometimes it can't be transliterated accurately, because the letters of that particular sound do not exist in the other alphabet. So transliteration is the process of converting one written script to another written script, such as Hebrew characters into the Latin alphabet. So for example, the name Muhammad can be spelled different ways in the Roman alphabet. Only the consonants, the M, the H, the M, the D, appear in the written version of the Perso-Arabic script. So you might have seen Muhammad spelled with M-O-H or M-A-H or M-U-H. It's always the consonants are usually the ones that stay the same because they can be transliterated. So I'm just going to pass over to Kausara to explain some of these sounds that we're talking about.
So as you know, some sounds don't exist in English language, but realistically, how do we actually get around this when we see sounds or words that don't exist in English? Well, two things first. So some people will anglicize their names because they know the sounds or the letter doesn't exist. So we might meet students or staff, particularly maybe from China, who have an English name because they know English speakers will struggle to say their name. So they adopt another name so people don't butcher theirs. However, others won't give us another name. And what do we do in this circumstance? I think it's important that we try. So it might take us a while to get used to saying those sounds because we're not familiar with them. But with a bit of practice and getting into a habit, then it will become easier over time. And also we need to get into a habit of being corrected, of being wrong. The first initial reaction should never be dismissal. So with our mics muted, I'm gonna just take you through the sounds and I'd like you to practice as well. Unfortunately, if we were face-to-face, this would probably be a bit easier, but we're having to do this online. But with your mics muted, I'm just going to go through some of the sounds. So for the first letter in the corner, in the first right-hand corner is Ayin, and this is an Arabic letter. Ayin sort of comes from the back of the throat, and you sort of squeeze your throat together. It's like Ayin. So some names you might hear like Ali, like we might have heard the word Ali, but Ali is an Arabic name, but obviously because we can't pronounce the ayin at the beginning, so it's actually Ali. So most people would anglicize their name into Ali to make it easier for us to pronounce. So Ali sort of comes from the back of the throat. The next letter, which is next to it, is also an Arabic letter. And this is Dod. Arabic is sometimes known as language of the Dod, because this is the only letter that exists in this. Like there's no other letter like it in other languages. Only Arabic has this letter, and it's like a really heavy D. If you imagine where the D comes from, and you just like press harder. I'm trying to remember how they taught us to say this letter, but it's like Dod, so it's Dod, Dod. Even though it's spelled dad, it's not dad. It's Dod. And then the two letters below it actually comes from my language. Even though these letters, you can see they appear in the English language, how we pronounce them are very, very different. So the GB is actually really hard. Even my little sister, who's continually learning the language, struggles with this, and it's ba. I never really know how to explain this, but it's sort of like it starts off with a G, halfway G, and then you sort of combine it with the B, so it's like ba. You start to make the G sound ba, ba, ba. And we'll see how like it fits in with another activity that I'm going to do later on. And then finally, we have the P sound. Like P exists in English, P exists in Yoruba, but the sound we make is completely different. Ours is more, it's louder. It's pa. So rather than pa, we say pa. Mano, which means to close the door, to turn off the lights, rather than pa. So pa, pa. I'm just going to play a short video that was nicely done by Alex, our Confucius teacher at DMU, about Chinese name and Chinese letters. That was nicely done by Alex, if you're watching, thank you. So I'm just going to move forward to just a short exercise that we're going to try together. If one person could unmute their mic, or if someone wants to volunteer to just read out these names, it's not to berate, it's just to see how like different people say the name, and then we're going to go through how it might actually be pronounced. These are common names that we see on our TV. If anyone would like to volunteer. Yes.
I think everybody's feeling a bit shy, so do you want me to to go? I'll just pronounce them how I've heard them other people pronounce them before. So John Boyega, Hassan Minhaj, Muhammad Ali, DJ Khaled, Lupita Nyong'o, and I know this one, but I think if you read it, it'll be Sarosi Ronan, but I know that's wrong.
Thank you, Hina. So sometimes, like we said, we've seen these people on our TV, we've heard their names. So the first one is John Boyega. We hear John Boyega a lot. However, John Boyega is actually Yoruba. So his name, like the GB sound that you heard earlier, is actually John Boyega. But because obviously a lot of people can't say that Bo sound, he anglicized his name to make it easier for us to pronounce. But Boyega doesn't have any meaning in my language. Boyega means to elevate wealth, to elevate glory higher. So it's a really, like, the meaning behind the name is quite cool. So if you ever see the name, or if you ever hear someone from your family say John Boyega, you can tell them there's actually a G in front of that, John Boyega. So you can try that as well, John Boyega, Boyega. And then the next one we might see as well is Hassan Minhaj. Hassan is an Arabic name. I think Minhaj as well comes from probably South Asian, as well as I think it's a Muslim name. So Hassan, there's actually a heavy H at the beginning of Hassan. I'm trying to think of if there's a word in English where it's similar. But the one way I tell people to describe the ha is like, imagine you're breathing into your hand and you're checking your breath. It's that kind of ha. So it's Hassan Minhaj, and the H in the Minhaj is also pronounced. It's not silent. So it's Hassan Minhaj, Hassan Minhaj. The next one is a name that we're quite common, like probably have heard. We have students as well who go by this first name. A lot of people, I've heard people call it Mohammed, different ways, just because obviously there's only certain letters that exist in the English language. The H also in this is quite heavy as well, so it's Moha rather than Moha, Mohammed. And then there's a double M in the word. And in Arabic, when you're pronouncing a name with a double letter, you have to emphasize those two letters. So it'll be Muhammad rather than Muhammad. So it'll be Muhammad, and then obviously his last name Ali, but as most people say, Muhammad Ali. So it's Muhammad. And then I don't know if anyone knows who DJ Khaled is, but I absolutely love DJ Khaled. So as we said as well, there's different variations of different names as well. So for some cultures, they might call it Khalid, they might call it Khalid, but it's an Arabic name as well. So Khalid is Khalid. As weird as that sounds, word sounds, it's almost like you're bringing up phlegm, but not. Sorry to be disgusting, but it's Khalid. So you might meet students who call themselves Khalid, or you might meet students who call themselves Khalid as well. And then Lupita Nyong'o is quite a big one as well, because I've heard people say Lupita Nyong'o, and it's just taking the time to really say those vowels. So it's Lupita Nyong'o rather than Lupita Nyong'o. So it's just taking the time to say these names and say the words and the letters. Lupita Nyong'o. And then finally, of course, we will meet students from Ireland, or as is it Lisa that kindly said she's from Wales. We'll meet different people with different ways of saying their names. So, for example, Saoirse Ronan is quite a big one, but there'll be Siobhan or Neve. So it's just taking the time to understand how people say those names. And once we know how, like, what the spelling, how to say it, then we can apply it to other names. I went to school with a person called Rory, and his name was spelled Ruraidh. And it took a while. Every lesson that we had, one teacher was always bound to say it wrong, but it was a learning curve, knowing that just like different names are spelled different but sound the same or different.
So now we're just going to go through a few little bits of advice to hopefully help you on kind of day-to-day things what we should and should not do. So we've just picked out a couple of examples. So first of all, we've got, I'm never going to remember that. So sometimes a name can be hard to say, but if that's your initial reaction, it could be really dismissive and you're showing that you don't really value that person. Do you have something shorter for that? If someone has a nickname, let them offer it to you first. Don't probe for a shorter version of their name, because as we've learned, it might be culturally inappropriate to shorten a name. Can I call you this instead? So can I call you Kay instead of Kausara? This is disrespectful because you're disregarding a person's entire history, their identity, you're giving them a new name. There's also a real uncomfortable power dynamic there by renaming somebody. Next one is, what is your real name? So don't immediately disregard someone's integrity by asking what's your real name though, because you don't think that their English sounding name is what their real name is. If as we've learned earlier, people may have decided to adopt other names, and that is entirely their own business. So we need to respect people when they know that we won't be able to say their name correctly, and it's going to take too much time for them to have to teach people every time they meet a new person. So, but if you're a good friend to them, and it might be special for you to inquire more about their heritage or their background, but it's all about the tone and the energy that you bring to that question. If you've just met them, take their name as what they've introduced themselves as. So next up, we have things that you should not do. So these are quite inappropriate actions that we perhaps do not realise are inappropriate, but maybe now that we look back on it, they weren't the right thing to do. So tapping somebody on the shoulder when you'd rather not get their name wrong, pointing to somebody, and then replacing their name with their pronouns instead, hoping that you'll get away with it. So it just, when you think about it, actually can be quite rude to point you over there. It's quite aggressive, it's a bit rude. Also just physically touching somebody, quite inappropriate. I think the whole point here is that we should be getting comfortable with being corrected. If you get it wrong, if you know you're going to get it wrong, then opening the conversation to be corrected is important. So a few things that we can go through on what you should say. So here's some suggestions. So repeating their name after they've introduced themselves. So this is reassuring that you've heard it and that you can say it correctly. So nice to meet you, Kausara. And that opens a conversation for Kausara to say, actually, it's not pronounced like that, it's pronounced like this. It just opens it up a bit. Reassure them. So I really want to make sure that I say your name correctly. Can you teach me? Again, that's opening the conversation for somebody to correct you, and that showing them that you're not going to be defensive about it. And politely asking for a reminder. I understand I have really terrible short-term memory. I'm awful with people's names, but also sometimes I'm really excited to meet somebody or really nervous that I forget to even listen to what they said their name is, let alone how to pronounce it. So to just ask of forgive me, because it's me that's in the wrong here. Can you remind me how to pronounce your name? Again, like I said, it's just opening that conversation to be corrected. And here's a few suggestions on what we can do. So first of all is double checking a name when you're writing it in an email, or if you're writing on a document, or even messaging somebody. And this is a really good habit to get into, because in our day-to-day lives, we're always so rushed to get this next email out or to do this next task that sometimes we just need to take a second to double check that their name matches what their email address says, or that check the last email that we're spelling it correctly. And when it is that when you do get it incorrect, sometimes it happens. We have when it autofills and you don't mean to. I've signed my name off as Helena before spelling my own name wrong. Just you send in an email to apologise. Oh, I'm sorry, I said your name wrong. I know it's the thing, so that they kind of reaffirm and say that I did get it wrong, because that in itself can end up snowballing, that name or wrong name is then carried on. Also, if you can imagine how difficult it is to get documents changed once your name is incorrect on it, so it's just such a hassle. So take those couple of seconds by just double checking. Next is correcting other people. So if you hear somebody else's name being said wrong, then please do correct them. Sometimes it means a lot to somebody to know that another person is willing to have that awkward encounter for you to correct another person. Also, it makes it clear that we're not willing to be lazy in other situations, and that even when you're not in the room, somebody else is going to make sure that your name is being pronounced correctly. Also, if you're inviting somebody around, then you can explain to perhaps family, if a friend's coming around, explaining to your family how to say that name, just again to have the awkward practicing before the person arrives. And the next thing is asking for the accents or the tonal markers that are on the name. Sometimes when we're writing, the tonal markers aren't always there. So this part is just to understand what's your best way of learning. So asking them if they wouldn't mind writing their name phonetically with the accent or with the accents for you to practice yourself. So that if perhaps you have a register that you have you've written next to it in a way that you understand which letters need to be highlighted, which ones have more tone on them, just learning which way it is for you to get it right, so that you can go back, practice it yourself, so that person doesn't have to stand there and teach you for 5-10 minutes. So I think that was the end of this part of it. We're going to move on to a discussion and having a chat